Basic Instinct is has the most paused moment in movie history.
Basic Instinct opens with a murder that immediately sets the tone. Jean Triplehorn is Beth Garner, and George Zunza is Gus Moran. The hook is simple and lurid. A rock star gets stabbed to death with an ice-pick mid-romance, and the prime suspect already wrote that exact scene in one of her novels. Nick's job is to catch her. Nick's problem is that he can't stay away from her. And today, we're going to count down 15 weird facts about this movie that you probably didn't know. Stick around for number 1, because it's the most personally devastating fact on this whole list, and it's got nothing to do with Hollywood. But before we get into it, hit like and subscribe. It helps YouTube push this to more people who watched it in their living room and lunged for the remote the second that someone walked in. You know who you are. Number 15. The script was written in 13 days on a Hawaiian bender. Joe Eszterhas wrote Basic Instinct in 13 days while vacationing in Hawaii. By his own account, the supplies were Rolling Stones records, a bottle of Jack Daniels, and a steady supply of nose candy. That is the most self-aware description of a creative process that any screenwriter ever offered out loud. And I respect the honesty. The finished script at town with no deal attached, and studios began circling. After a bidding war, Carolco paid $3 million for it, the biggest sale ever for an original screenplay at that point. Writers waved that number around in salary talks for years. It proved a screenwriter could get paid like the star. Then Paul Verhoeven came aboard wanting big changes, including a lesbian sex scene that Eszterhas hated. The fight got ugly enough that Eszterhas and the producer walked off the whole thing. A new writer was brought in to overhaul it with Verhoeven across multiple drafts. Verhoeven read the rewrites and decided that his own ideas were undramatic and a little stupid, and crawled almost all the way back to the version that Eszterhas banged out in Hawaii in 13 days. 4 rewrites, 1 director power struggle, a mountain of studio money, and the winner was still the Jack Daniels draft. Number 14. A dozen plus major actresses turned this role down. Sharon Stone didn't stroll into Basic Instinct. She was the last name left after everyone else said no. Before she was ever seriously in the running, more than a dozen major actresses were offered Catherine Trammell and passed. Michelle Pfeiffer was the top target, and producers chased her for months with a new angle every time. But every time the answer came back no. The rejections kept stacking up. Kim Basinger passed. Julia Roberts and Meg Ryan, 2 of the biggest names alive, both turned it down. Deborah Winger, Kathleen Turner, Geena Davis, Ellen Barkin, Kelly Lynch, and Mariel Hemingway all looked at Catherine and walked away. Meanwhile, Michael Douglas was locked in and getting nervous about carrying something this controversial by himself. He told the studio straight out that he wanted someone to share the risk, because he didn't want to be the only one standing there when the backlash hit. The trouble was that the woman who eventually took the part wasn't anywhere near that star tier. Stone had worked with Verhoeven on Total Recall, but she was an unknown next to the names that were passing on this thing, and she auditioned for months. While Douglas reportedly refused to even screen test with her at first, he wanted somebody that the industry already knew. But here's the irony that none of them saw coming. The role that they all wrote off as career poison became the defining performance of the decade for the one woman who was brave enough to grab it. Number 13. The cameraman got in bed with them. Yeah, the big sex scene wasn't filmed from a polite distance, with a shy little camera tucked behind a lampshade. No, Jan de Bont, the cinematographer, reportedly worked it up close, camera in his own hands, right there next to Douglas and Stone between takes. The whole idea was to make the lens feel like it was inside the room with them instead of just peeking in from across it. Whether the 2 actors loved having him that close is a different question, and not one either of them has ever really answered. None of it is as spontaneous as it looks. Verhoeven mapped the movements out in advance. The set was stripped down to a central crew, and the lighting was built to make everything look dangerous and expensive. The reality on the floor was blocking marks, rehearsals with clothes on, and all the unsexy technical tricks that make movie sex look like movie sex. Stone has said that she never really felt comfortable around Douglas while they shot it, and the awkwardness actually fed the tension that you see on screen. So the heat in that scene is partly two people who weren't entirely at ease, pretending that they couldn't keep their hands off each other. Jan de Bont went on to direct Speed and Twister. So the man clearly understood how to film people stuck in high-pressure situations where one wrong move could ruin everybody's day. Number 12. Two people, two very different versions of that stabbing. The guy who gets murdered in the very first scene may have actually gotten stabbed while doing it. Bill Cable played Johnny Boz, the retired rock star tied to the bed and ice-picked to death mid-hookup. The setup was supposed to be standard Hollywood make-believe, a retractable pick, blood packs rigged on the chest, and enough screaming to sell it. Stone tells it like a near disaster. After one take, Cable didn't respond. He just lay there limp and unconscious. She panicked, convinced that the fake pick had failed and that she actually killed the man. The explanation turned out to be almost as grim. She'd hammered his chest so many times during the take that he passed out cold. Cassandra Peterson, Elvira herself, who had been involved with Cable years before the film, has told an even rougher version. By her account, the pick wasn't supposed to do anything but hit the blood packs. Except Stone got so far into it that the point went through the packs and into the skin underneath in more than one spot. Cable screams, she says, were the real thing, and he ended up getting treated for puncture wounds and walked away with permanent little scars on his chest. The two stories don't fully match, which in its own way is kind of perfect. But either way, the man got hurt filming a fake stabbing. And in a Paul Verhoeven production, that somehow still doesn't crack the top 5 most alarming things that could have gone wrong on that set. Verhoeven had to fight the ratings board 7 times. There was a very specific problem baked into the deal. Paul Verhoeven was contractually obligated to hand TriStar an R-rated movie, and in 1992, an NC-17 was a commercial death sentence. The big theater chains wouldn't screen those films, and the major papers wouldn't run ads. And the rating mostly functioned as a guarantee that almost nobody would see whatever earned it. With $49 million sunk into the production, NC-17 was simply not an option. I feel like every time we talk about a Paul Verhoeven movie on this channel, there's always some fight with the ratings board. Anyways, Verhoeven submitted the film, and the board handed it back NC-17. So he recut it. He sent it in again, NC-17. So then he recut and resubmitted, and then the same answer again. It reportedly went 7 rounds before he finally got his R rating, and the total damage was only about 40 seconds of footage, mostly the most explicit shots swapped for slightly tamer angles, trimmed carefully enough that the momentum never sagged. Verhoeven has said that somewhere in all those rounds, members of the board actually told him that Carolco should quit fighting and just release this thing as an NC-17 film. The way that he tells it, they figured that a production this glossy and expensive could finally hand the rating some legitimacy that it never had. The studio's answer was a hard no, but Verhoeven filed the idea away. 3 years later, he swung for the fences with Showgirls, a deliberate big-budget NC-17 meant to single-handedly rescue the rating. And he turned it into one of the most infamous flops of the decade. 7 rounds to earn the R. 3 years to prove that NC-17, couldn't be saved. Number 10. That sweet old lady. That was an Oscar winner. Hazel Dopkins is one of those small, strange details that makes Basic Instinct curdle just a little bit once you see it. Now she's barely in the movie, a quiet, polite older woman that Catherine drives out to visit. But the backstory does the damage. Hazel murdered her entire family for no reason that anyone could ever name. She did her time, and then somehow came out on the other side as one of Catherine Trammell's close friends. And the weapon, per the cops working the old case, was a knife from her own wedding. Killing your family is grim enough, but doing it with a wedding gift, that's a detail that just sits there and rots. When Nick points out that the sweet little lady wiped out her whole family, Catherine doesn't flinch. She just says that Hazel's helped her understand homicidal impulse. That is the friendship. What plenty of 1992 audiences didn't catch is who that calm old lady actually was. That is Dorothy Malone, an Academy Award winner for Written on the Wind back in 1956, and a household face in the 1960s as Constance Mackenzie on Peyton Place. Basic Instinct turned out to be her final screen role, which means one of the great faces of mid-century Hollywood signed off by playing a tranquil grandma who slaughtered her family with the good cutlery. And none of that casting was an accident either. Verhoeven loved the idea of a clean, pleasant surface with something rotten breathing right underneath it. Number 9. Michael Douglas practiced driving upstairs alone at night. Among everything else it was doing, Basic Instinct is a love letter to Hitchcock's San Francisco. The winding streets, the punishing hills, the neighborhoods that feel a little off no matter what time it is. Verhoeven leaned all the way into that. And the car chase is where it gets physical. Most stars would happily hand that sequence to the stunt team and then go sit in their trailer. Douglas, a former race car driver, wanted to do most of his own driving. That sounds cool until you remember what driving means in this movie. At one point, Nick Curran takes his car straight up a flight of steep sidewalk steps on Kearny Street over on Telegraph Hill. And get ready for it, because Douglas apparently went out to those steps at night by himself 4 nights in a row, feeling out the suspension, learning how the car took the climb, working out exactly what was going to happen when he hit the bottom step at speed. Completely normal behavior, right? Nothing remotely strange about a major movie star out alone in the dark repeatedly testing how an automobile reacts to a staircase. The steps are still there, by the way. Now they're called the Peter Macchiarini steps, named for a San Francisco artist and jeweler. They'd already shown up decades earlier in the Humphrey Bogart noir Dark Passage, and years later Venom sent a motorcycle screaming up the same stretch. So these stairs, they've got some range. We can only assume that Douglas still knows exactly how to drive up them. Number 8. The reboot rumor laced with a Walgreens snub. In July 2025, Amazon MGM and United Artists handed Joe Eszterhas, now 80 and decades removed from the Hollywood mainstream, $2 million to write a reboot of his own 1992 movie, with another $2 million waiting if it actually gets made. And Eszterhas did not keep quiet about it. He pitched the whole thing as anti-woke, framed it as a one-man crusade to drag raw sexuality back into a tidied-up movie business, and then released a statement about his writing process that you genuinely need to hear out loud. He described his creative partner as a twisted little man who lives somewhere deep inside of him. He was born at 29. He will die at 29, and is, as of this writing, very excited to deliver what Eszterhas called a wild and orgasmic ride. An 80-year-old man announcing a major studio project by crediting a tiny eternal man who resides within his body. That's the pitch. When somebody asked Sharon Stone if she'd be coming back, she didn't labor over it. There's no reboot happening, she said, because Joe Eszterhas couldn't write himself out of a Walgreens drugstore. Roughly 9 months later, Eszterhas claimed that Saltman director Emerald Fennell was in talks to direct it, and Fennell's people knocked that down within days, saying flatly that there's no truth to it and she's not involved in any way. So here's where the big comeback stands. A script that nobody's greenlit, a leading lady who'd rather talk about Walgreens, and a director who says that she was never in the building. Hey, if you're enjoying this tour through one of the most chaotic productions of the 90s, hit like, subscribe, and then drop a comment. Was Catherine Trammell guilty, innocent, or just better at writing endings than everybody else? All right, let's go back to the interrogation room. The protest that accidentally sold more tickets. Before Basic Instinct ever reached a theater, LGBTQ+ advocacy groups in San Francisco were already furious about it. They'd read the script, and it handed its bisexual and lesbian characters a single personality between them: predatory, manipulative, homicidal. At a moment when there was almost no other queer presence on a major screen to offset that, activists argued that the only portrait audiences were getting was a deeply ugly one. Joe Eszterhas usually met with community leaders and agreed to soften some of it. Verhoeven and Douglas refused to change a frame, calling the whole thing art. So the protests escalated from picketing to outright sabotage of the shoot. Activists blew whistles during takes to wreck the sound, waved drivers down to lean on their horns, splashed paint on a location, and at one point glitter-bombed a set before the crew ever showed up. It got tense enough that the San Francisco Police Department reportedly had riot officers around the location shoot day after day. Then came the clever S shot of the whole campaign. Catherine did it. The entire commercial engine of this movie was the mystery of whether Catherine was the killer. So activists printed the ending on flyers, slapped it on stickers, and handed out the spoiler outside theaters to gut the suspense in advance and push a boycott. Did it work? Not even slightly. If anything, it wrapped the movie in caution tape and turned it into the most tempting thing in town. People heard the noise, and they lined right up. Basic Instinct became one of the biggest hits of 1992. Sometimes outrage is the best marketing that money can't buy. Number 6. Freeze frame the opening, and it gets a little weird. The killer's face in that first murder is never clearly shown. That's deliberate, tucked behind a curtain of blonde hair the entire time. You're not meant to know who's holding the ice pick, but fans have been freeze-framing those few flashes for decades, and a stubborn little theory grew out of it. In the split second where the face slips past the hair, some viewers swear the features don't quite read as Sharon Stone. The argument goes that what you're glimpsing is closer to Jean Triplehorn, a fake half-second suggestion that Beth, not Catherine, could be the one on top of that bed. Now that's a fan theory, not a confirmed bit of trickery. But it fits the movie so well that people can't quite let it go. Your eye snags on something, your gut flags it, and you walk out of that scene feeling like the film is holding a card that it won't show you, which is the whole game. Catherine writes novels where murders happen. Then matching murders follow in real life. Basic Instinct does the exact same thing to you. It hands you one story and then hides another one in the corners, and then of course plays innocent. The final shot is the purest version of that. The camera drifts down on Nick and Catherine in bed, and it lands on an ice pick stashed underneath. Then it simply stops. No confirmation, no confession, and the detail hunters have a field day. Even here, the pick under the bed is solid metal, while the murder weapon earlier had a wooden handle. That's just enough mismatch to keep the door cracked. Maybe she did all of it. Maybe she framed Beth for every bit of it. 34 years later, people are still fighting over a question that the movie opened in its first 60 seconds and never had any intention of answering cleanly. Number 5. A tabloid turned Michael Douglas's rehab stay into a sex addiction story. Around the time that Basic Instinct came out, Michael Douglas checked into rehab. By his own telling, the trigger was alcohol and grief. He had just lost his stepfather, and he's called it a genuinely useful stay that helped him sort a few things out. Then the press got hold of it and glanced at the ice pick movie that he headlined and decided that the truth wasn't nearly fun enough. So the story mutated into sex addiction, and Douglas has been swatting at it ever since. His account is blunt. Some clever editor over in London essentially invented the phrase to sell papers. They slapped it on him and watched it catch fire. Whether sex addiction was truly that new is a debate for somebody else. But the fact that it got welded onto a man who went in for drinking purely because of a role that he had just played, it's not really up for argument. And once it stuck, it wouldn't come loose. An unauthorized biography printed it as fact years later. Interviewers kept resurrecting it, and the denial never once outran the rumor, which is exactly how it goes when the fiction flatters the headline more than the man does. His own father reportedly shrugged the whole thing off with a grin, joking that he'd been addicted to sex his entire life. He didn't see the problem. The label roared back again years later when Douglas spoke publicly about his cancer diagnosis, and he's never stopped denying it. It's also never fully gone away. Number 4, she was furious and she let it stay. The interrogation scene is the image that everyone remembers, the single most paused frame in the movie, maybe in the decade. Basic Instinct has the most paused moment in movie history, and how it actually got made depends entirely on who's telling it. Verhoeven's version has stayed pretty consistent for 30 years. He says the shot was his idea, that he walked Stone through it beforehand using a story about a woman that he knew in his student days, and that she understood the whole plan and was on board. As far as he's concerned, it was a decision that they made together. But Stone remembers something else entirely. In her memoir, she says that she was told on set that the white of her underwear was bouncing light and wrecking the shot, so she needed to remove it with the promise that nothing would actually be visible. She says that she had no clue what the camera really captured until she was sitting in a screening room packed with agents, lawyers, and executives, most of the men none of whom had anything to do with making the film. By her account, she got up, walked into the projection booth, slapped Verhoeven across the face, and then went to her car and phoned her lawyer, who told her the up-the-dress shot wasn't even legally shot that way, and she had grounds to fight it. She's been blunt that hers is the only perspective that counts here, on the grounds that she's the one who was up there on screen. And in the end, she let the scene stay. She decided that it was right for the film and for Catherine, and she owned the choice. But the two accounts of how that shot happened never matched, and at this point they never will. That shadow never quite left the chair.